This is the Zoytech 4K PTZ camera. So I'm going to unbox it quickly just so that you can see what actually comes in the box. This is a piece of foam, and here's the quick start guide, a remote control, and this is a mount so that you mount the camera on this and attach it somewhere. And here are the screws for mounting it. Another piece of foam, and here's the cable, power cable, adapter. So it outputs 12 volts at 1 amp. So 12 watts of power, that's reasonable, which means you can also replace this with a battery, like a V-mount battery, and then use the right barrel connector to power the camera. So you don't necessarily need to be connected to the mains power. And here's the camera itself. Another piece of foam, and on the bottom here there's the wall mount. So if you want to attach it to the wall, this is probably a good choice to mount it on the wall and then have the camera on it. So that's all that comes in the box, and I'm gonna go through the details of the camera. So this is the Zoytech 4K PTZ camera with the model name Zoe PTZ, and in terms of dimensions it's almost like a cube. So if you look at it from any orientation, it's pretty much a cube in the sense of its dimensions. So its height is 18.6 centimeters, so that's from this part to this part. But when the lens is moving, the height can go up to 21.6 centimeters. So as you can see here, when I move the lens up, it becomes a bit taller. So that's just something to keep in mind if you're going to install this somewhere where there's something right above it. Then just make sure you have enough space for the camera to move upwards as well. The length of the camera in this direction is 18.3 centimeters, and the width of the camera, so in this orientation, is 16.1 centimeters. And the whole thing weighs 1.294 kilograms, so essentially 1.3 kilograms. On the bottom of the camera there's a 1/4 inch 20 threaded mount, and in front of it there's an anti-twist locating hole. And this whole mount area has this grippy material which should stop it from moving wherever you attach it. But it has an anti-twist hole anyway, so that shouldn't be an issue. And then you have these 4 foots as well if you just want it to sit on a flat surface. And in terms of mounting options, one thing to mention is that the camera has a gyroscope for automatic detection of mounting orientation. So if you were to mount it in a different orientation than expected, it would automatically detect it and correct the image. In terms of lens movement, the lens can move 90 degrees upwards, 53 degrees downwards, and on the panning side it can move 173 degrees to each side. So it pretty much covers the full range. And the pan speed is 0.05 degrees to 100 degrees per second, and the tilt speed is 0.05 degrees to 50 degrees per second. On top of the lens, right at the front of the camera, there's a tally light, and the tally light can be configured to be automatic. So if it's yellow, it would be powering on. If it's green, it's in preview mode, and if it's red, it's in program mode. So if you're using this camera like a studio camera, then the person in front of the camera will know what state the camera is in. And you can configure the tally light to be manually controlled, or you can disable it altogether. So for example, I will be recording sports, so I will disable it altogether. And the filter thread size for the lens is 58 millimeters, so you can attach filters to it. And this particular camera that I have is a 12x optical zoom. So the one thing I wanted to mention is that there's a few different variations of this type of camera, and one is the 12x zoom, which is the one I have here, but there's 2 alternative options as well. So there's an 18x and a 25x zoom as well, but those cameras are slightly less wide. So a few things about this lens, so I'm just talking about the 12x lens now, is that the focal length is between 3.4 millimeters and 40.3 millimeters. And just to give you an idea of the sensor size, it's a 1/2.3 inch sensor. So that gives you an idea of the field of view with the focal length that it has. So the focal length is 3.4 millimeters to 40.3 millimeters. And the diagonal angle of view at the wide end is 78.5 degrees, which is the equivalent to around 13 millimeters on a micro four thirds lens. And at the telephoto end, it's 7.4 degrees, which is equivalent to around 170 millimeters on a micro four thirds camera. So you get a really wide range. So if you think about it in terms of micro four thirds, you have a lens which goes between 13 millimeters and 170 millimeters. And if you think about similar Olympus micro four thirds lenses, there's a lens which is 14 to 150 millimeters, and there's also a lens which is 12 to 200 millimeters. So those are the closest Olympus micro four thirds lenses that I could think of. And in terms of horizontal angle of view, so in this orientation, at the widest is 70.8 degrees, and at the telephoto end is 6.4 degrees. And in terms of vertical angle of view, so in this orientation, at the widest is 42.7 degrees, and at the telephoto end is 3.6 degrees. So the 18x and 25x zoom version of this camera have different fields of view. The one thing to remember about those lenses is that at the wide end, they're not as wide as this lens. So if you're looking for the widest, this is the widest lens that you will get. But if you're looking for something that you need more telephoto range, then you can go for the 18x or the 25x. So there's one more thing I need to mention about those two lenses. Those two lenses don't have the time of flight system for autofocusing. So if you look here right below the lens, you might be able to see two shiny squares. And these are, I think, used for the time of flight autofocusing, which this lens uses. But I think the 18x and 25x don't actually use this time of flight autofocusing system. And for this particular camera, for the time of flight autofocus system, it has 6 focal zones, and it also have point focusing as well. And in terms of aperture, the maximum aperture for this is f1.6 at the widest and f2.8 at the narrowest or the telephoto end. And the minimum aperture is f11 across the full range of zoom. The shutter speed varies between 1/25 and 1/10,000. And it also has an auto mode, so you can set the shutter speed to auto. And it also has flicker cancellation adjustment for 50 Hz, 60 Hz, and you can also set that to auto. So the sensor on this camera is a Sony 1/2.3 inch sensor, and it's a Sony back illuminated and stacked Exmor R CMOS sensor, and it supports Ultra HD 4K. So it has 4K 30 hardware video encoder, so you can produce videos at 4K 30 and 1080p at 60 frames per second. And the maximum bitrate for streaming is 50 megabits per second, and it supports both constant bitrate and variable bitrate. And it can simultaneously output 4K over HDMI and also 1080p over 3G SDI, and also do NDI output over the Ethernet port. And all of these will be with audio embedded, and you can use all three of them simultaneously. Although there's a bit of a difference in the resolution of the HDMI and the 3G SDI. So the HDMI goes up to 4K 30, whereas the SDI is only 1080p. And in terms of the NDI support, it supports the full bandwidth NDI, so NDI HX and NDI HX2 and NDI HX3. And it also supports live streaming protocols including RTP, RTSP, RTMP, RTMPS, SRT, but SRT is caller only. And it also supports enhanced RTMP, so you can have RTMP live streaming, but with a H.265 HEVC encoding as opposed to the H.264 encoding. So the file size will be smaller. So if your bandwidth is limited, then you can use the H.265 with enhanced RTMP. Although you have to keep in mind that there's certain functionalities such as the previewing, which switches off when you start using H.265 with enhanced RTMP on the preview screen. So only use that if you really need it to, because there's a balance. You lose out on the preview aspect, which is quite important, but you get the smaller bandwidth requirement for actually live streaming anything. And one of the nice things about this device is that you don't actually need a computer to live stream, so you can configure everything on this device itself and do the live streaming, which reduces one more complexity in your system. And it also has Wi-Fi, so you can configure this device to act as a Wi-Fi access point and then connect to it to control the various aspects of the camera through your phone or anything else that you want. Or you can alternatively configure everything beforehand, and just when you plug things in and it switches on, then it will automatically start streaming if you have it configured that way. Okay, so I want to go over the ports on this device because it does have quite a lot of options and flexibility in terms of how you can use this device. So here you have the DC input port, and the requirement for the DC power is 12 volts and 1 amp. So 12 watts is the maximum consumption, which in terms of the current that it requires is quite low, but the typical consumption is around 8 watts. So even if you do provide 12 volts at 1 amp, you're probably not going to use up the whole thing. Now, the one thing about this port is that it's a really uncommon DC port. So I don't know if you can see that in the footage here. Let me see if I can. So this is not the typical barrel connectors that you find on dummy batteries for mirrorless cameras. You can see that it's slightly different. And if I show you the AC adapter for it, I don't know if you can see that in the image there, but there's a pin right in the middle, which is something that you don't have on the typical dummy battery barrel connectors or other barrel connectors that are really common. So there's obviously a disadvantage to this in that I haven't been able to find a USB trigger cable for this type of barrel connector. And I also haven't been able to find any AC adapters for this type of connection. And I haven't even been able to find any DC barrel jack converters so that I could convert from this type to another type to it. So as far as I know, the only way to use this port is with the supplied AC adapter that comes with it. And if you know anywhere else where I can get similar AC adapters or USB triggered cables, then let me know as well, because that's something I'm interested in. Because what I like to do is use the DC input with a USB power bank, so have a USB trigger cable go into this and then use power over Ethernet with the Ethernet port. Which brings me to the Ethernet port. So the Ethernet port is really useful because it supports power over Ethernet. So you can just have one cable going into this device and have it for your data and video streaming and everything that you need, NDI, network storage, and internet connection for streaming, and it will also provide power. So one connection for everything. So the only reason I really want to connect the DC port to a USB power bank is to just have it as backup in case the power on this was to fail. Because you still have Wi-Fi on this device, so you can have two methods of internet access, one through the Ethernet port and one through the Wi-Fi. And here we have the 3G SDI port. So it supports 1080p at 60 frames per second. And next we have the HDMI port. And the HDMI port supports 4K at 30 frames per second. And again, I want to repeat that you can have simultaneous 4K through the HDMI and then 1080p through the SDI connection. And you can also have NDI output at the same time. And all three of them would be embedded with the audio. So really flexible in that sense. And then there's a USB-A port, and the USB-A port can be used for USB microphones, and it can also be used for a USB memory stick for recording. So two useful features for the USB port: microphones and recording. I think the microphone option is quite interesting because if you have a USB microphone, then you can just start using it to add audio to your video footage, which is in addition to the audio that automatically goes in through the front microphones. Or if you also wanted to record the video footage in case there's a problem with the live streaming, you can always stick a USB stick in there and have it recorded to a USB stick as well, which is quite convenient because I think everyone has a USB stick with a USB-A port on it somewhere which they can use for this purpose. And then there's RS-232 serial connections for controlling the device. So if you have a dedicated controller that works with a serial type of connections, then you can use that. And then you have the RS-485 or 422 connections here, so you can also use it with that depending on the controller that you have. And right here on the bottom in the corner, I don't know if you can see that there, there's a slot for a micro SD card. So you can also use the micro SD card slot to record the video footage if you wanted to. And above the micro SD card slot here, there's an audio line in, and that's another way to have audio going into this device. So you have the USB port, the audio line in, and there's a built-in microphones for it as well. But one thing I want to mention about the audio line in is that it's a line level input. So you can't actually connect a 3.5mm microphone to it and expect this device to power it. So if you have a microphone which requires power, then you need to power it separately. So maybe one of those microphones that have a built-in battery or run with an AA battery or something, then you can plug it in, but it needs to provide power itself so that it can match the audio line in levels of input. So this won't actually power the microphone input. So in addition to these ports, the device also has Wi-Fi. So the Wi-Fi can be configured in two different ways. One is for accessing a network and internet, and that can be used for live streaming if you wanted to. So that's in addition to the Ethernet port. And another way to configure the device is to set the Wi-Fi up as an access point. So that way the Wi-Fi can't be used for accessing internet, but what it can be used for is to connect to the camera and control it remotely. So you can connect your laptop or smartphone to it and control the camera that way, while the video streaming or anything else is going through the Ethernet port. So in addition to these ports and Wi-Fi, this device also has Bluetooth. But currently there's no Bluetooth functionality available on this device, but it will come in the future. So in the future, some of the control aspects of the camera will be available via Bluetooth. And another thing I want to mention about this camera is that it does have an infrared receiver, so you can use the remote control to actually control it. So let me just show the controller as well. So this is the controller, as you can see, and the controller takes two AAA batteries. So you need two of these type of batteries to be able to run the remote control, and it works via infrared. So I think what will happen is once they actually implement the Bluetooth features, then instead of using this remote, you would be able to control it with Bluetooth with a different remote, and there's no problem with obstruction to the front of the camera or anything obstructing the light coming out of this remote. And let me just show the front of this device as well. So these two small holes, I assume, is where the built-in microphones are, and there's also two LEDs, one to show the power and the other one the status of the camera. And this area is also where the infrared remote receiver is located, and then the time of flight would be there, and then you have the tally light above the lens itself. This camera supports on-screen display overlays, so you can have text between 1 and 50 characters and images in the JPEG or PNG format, as long as they are less than 1.7 megabytes, and the resolution needs to be less than the resolution of the canvas. So just keep that in mind if you're uploading an image to this device. Make sure you set it to a resolution which is less than the canvas itself. And it also has scoreboard functionality, and it supports vertical video recording without actually rotating the camera. So you can have the camera in the regular orientation and then twist the image, or automatically do it without actually rotating the camera. So you don't need to set up the camera in this orientation. You can have this camera in this orientation the whole time and then choose whether you want to have vertical video or if you still want to have horizontal video. And another thing worth mentioning is that you can stream and record simultaneously. And one thing I forgot to mention previously is that in addition to recording to a micro SD card or a USB stick, you can also record to a network storage over the Ethernet port. So you have three different options in terms of how you want to record the video. And you can record and stream simultaneously. And the device supports FAT32 and exFAT file formats. And the device also has REST APIs for controlling and automating functionality of the device. So you could essentially build your own application for this device if you wanted to, using those REST APIs. And again, this camera can be used with various different controlling protocols and options. So you have the NDI, which you can control it with, but you also have the serial ports. So it can be controlled remotely via IP VISCA or serial Pelco, VISCA RS232, RS485 or 422 from a PC or from a dedicated camera controller. And as I mentioned, the camera can also be controlled via NDI over the Ethernet port or via REST APIs. Let me plug it into power so that you see what lights come on. So here I have the AC adapter. So let me plug this in. And I'm gonna plug the AC adapter into the camera. So one thing I want to mention about this camera is that it doesn't have a power on or power off switch. So as soon as you plug it in, it will turn on. So the only thing you can really do is it has this power button on the remote control, which you can actually use to set it to sleep. And what happens is the camera turns around and tilts its head downwards, and it will stop transmitting an image. So I'm going to plug in the AC adapter into the camera, and you can see that the lights came on and it seems to turn. So I think that's an initialization thing that it does. And you can also see that the tally light has come on. So the tally light and the two lights on the bottom have come on, and they indicate the status of the camera. So the tally light has now switched off and the power light is still on. So one more thing I need to do is to connect it to a network. So I'm going to plug in the network cable into the Ethernet port. And there you can see the power is on. Although I'll have to mention that the Ethernet port I've connected it to doesn't actually have power over Ethernet, so it's just a regular Ethernet connection. And another thing I wanted to mention about the Ethernet port is that if you want to use it with power over Ethernet, then you have to use a cable which is at least Cat5e cable in order to make sure that it provides the necessary power. So keep that in mind, Cat5e or higher. And again, one more thing to mention about the DC port here. You can see that the plug doesn't go in all the way. So don't try to push it in too hard. That's just the way this DC port is. It kind of just goes in halfway. Doesn't go in all the way that you get with other barrel connectors typically. Okay, one thing I wanted to show is what happens when you set this camera to sleep. So I'm going to press this power button on the remote control here and it should go to sleep. So as you can see, the camera actually faces the other way and points downwards, and then it switches off the video footage that's actually going to the software or any other output. And then I press it again to turn it back on, essentially awaken it from a sleep status that it was in. Once you've connected the Zoe PTZ to the network, then you can use its IP address or its name to connect to it directly. So I'm not going to go into the details of how you find it, but it's actually on the bottom of the device itself. You can find the details, and if you can't find it there, then you can connect to your local router, and that would typically be at a IP address of 192.168.0.1 unless you've configured it differently. And then if you go to your network router, then you should be able to see a list of connected devices with the MAC addresses and IP addresses. And from there, you can find the IP address if the details are provided on the camera doesn't actually allow you to log into the device. So if you enter the IP address, then you come across this page, and the username and password to log in is admin. So admin for the username and admin for the password as well. And I'm going to click login. And once you log in, you come across this screen, and this screen and everything here is the screen that you would typically use to control the camera and do everything that you need to do. And here you have a reset button. So if you change any of these settings, then you can press this last button here to reset it. And this is to move the image. So if you press this, you can move the image. And if you press this one, you can rotate the image. And this is to zoom out. And this is to zoom in. And this changes the quality. I'm going to leave the quality as it is because I don't really need a higher image quality for the preview. And I just like to repeat that this actually doesn't have any impact on the image that you're recording or the image that you're live streaming. This is just for the preview itself. So I don't think it's worth changing the quality to a high quality just for the preview, since it just takes up more processing power. Now these settings here, if you press plus on these settings, then you go to the settings page for this particular aspect. So let's just say for live streaming or recording or overlay displays. And here you have a bunch of buttons for focusing and exposure locking and various things, and also the pan and tilt. And here you have a bunch of presets where you can save the focal length within the zoom range and the focus point as well. And then you can just press these to go to that particular position of the lens. So one way to use these is to just press the plus and then configure it accordingly and save these things here or delete them as you wish. And you can also use these to change the focus. So the reason I can't change the focus now is because I have autofocus on. So if I change this from focus one push to focus manual, now I should be able to change this. And you can use these controls to control the camera. So aside from using these buttons here, which take you to the settings for each of these things, if you go to settings here on top, you actually go to the same screens that the user interface has. So instead of pressing these buttons here and configuring things, I'm going to go to the settings page, which takes you to the same page. But I think it's a little bit more intuitive in terms of seeing the different settings page from this side of the user interface. So the first page that you see is here, where it gives you some details about the memory, the CPU usage, whether NDI is off or not, the startup time, and various things like the IP address and the network details and the state of the Wi-Fi. And you can also ping it. Do a LAN ping as well. And let's do a discovery scan. So if you have multiple Zoetek devices, then it would detect more devices here. But right now, I don't have any other Zoetek devices here. And it also gives you some details about the camera itself. So the aperture, the level of noise reduction, the shutter speed, and so on. And here you have details about the video encoding. So you have the first stream, which is the main stream, and the secondary stream. So you can have two streams being encoded at the same time. So this one has these settings and this one has this other setting, and the video output and the audio. So before we do anything, it's worth checking these things here. So we have the hardware version, the firmware version, and the versions for all the different things. So before I go any further, I'm going to just verify that I have the latest firmware version. I'm going to check the firmware version here, which is 1.0.2.44. And I'm going to go to the Zoetek website to check whether this is the latest version or not. So if I go to the Zoetek website, 4K PTZ camera, and then the download section, and the firmware. So here you can see that the firmware version is 1.0.2.50. So this is a later version than what I have. So I'm going to download it. Then I'm going to go back to the Zoe UI and go to System, and then click on Upgrade, and then choose the firmware file, and then click Upgrade. And then it gives me a warning message. I'm just going to press Confirm. So one of the things about upgrading the firmware was that you only extract the zip file once. You don't extract the zip file twice. So there's a zip file inside the zip file, but you don't need to extract it the second time. So you extract it once, but the second time you don't extract the zip file, you just upload that. And inside that, there's a JSON file, which tells the UI what it should do. And the image file also for the firmware flashing is inside that. So the firmware update has been completed and the device has restarted itself. And usually the camera does this routine every time it starts, where it checks the pan location and it just turns all the way to one side and then back to the front. So it's doing that. And in theory, this page should redirect us to the login page, but it might not do that. Okay, it's done it now. So now we have to log in again because obviously the device restarted itself. So any sessions that we had within that web app has now disappeared. So we need to log in again. And if I log in now and then go to settings, and here you can see that the firmware version is now upgraded to 1.0.2.50. So this is the README file that came with this release of the firmware version. And as you can see, it's only been a few bug fixes. So no major updates to any of the functionality. These are just bug fixes that they've added. And this release was from December 2024. Okay, so let's go to the camera, and if you click on image here on the left-hand side menu, here you get all the different settings for exposure, and here you have the sub menus as well. So here you have auto exposure lock and the mode that you want, whether you want shutter priority or aperture priority or manual or auto. And then let me just set this to auto, and then you have exposure compensation and whether it's a backlit situation. And so this is gain, which is effectively the ISO of the camera. So you can limit it to what you think is reasonable. So the default seems to be 10, so I'm not going to touch it because once the ISO goes really high, the image quality obviously degrades and there will be a lot of noise in the image. And then you have the flickering. So 50 Hertz, 60 Hertz or auto. I typically use 50 Hertz in the location that I'm in, but for the time being, I've disabled it because I can also do that manually myself with the shutter speed. And then how you want the metering to be, average, center, spot, and matrix. So very much like a normal camera. And here you have the options for focusing. And you also get these options on the live control page, which is, you can go to it from here. But this menu is obviously a little bit more detailed and elaborated. And then you have the zoom options, so the speed of the zoom and where you want the zoom to be and whether digital zoom is enabled or not. If you enable digital zoom, then obviously the picture will degrade once you zoom in too much. So just keep that in mind, but it is actually a good option to have digital zoom, particularly since this one is the 12x zoom, so it doesn't actually zoom in that much relative to the other one, which was I think 18x and 25x, if I remember correctly. And then the exposure, I already went over this, and the coloring, you can again change these to what suits you. And then the image, the brightness, contrast, sharpness, gamma, flip mode. So I've disabled it, but here you can have horizontal flip. So there you can see that it's flipped the image horizontally. And if you wanted a vertical flip, we can also get that. It just takes a few seconds for the camera to do that. So every time you change this, then it needs to do some work. So there you see the vertical flip. And I'm going to disable this because it doesn't make sense for the demo that I'm doing now. But just so that you know, you can actually flip the image. So if you have, for example, the camera mounted upwards to a roof, then you can flip it to make sure the image comes in the right orientation. And then here on the right hand side, there's noise reduction. So here you can choose whether you want the 2D or 3D noise reduction. And there's also style for the image. So you can choose what you want. I've just left it as the default because that's what I want. And if you go back to the left hand side of the screen, here we have PTZ. So I can click on that. And here you have all the different settings. So this is if you want to control it with a PTZ controller, which is plugged in into your serial port, then you can use this. I'm not using any of that, so I'm not going to change that. The only thing I would say regarding the infrared remote channel is that you can control the camera with the remote control. So it does have quite a few features that you can control that way. And here's the details for the tally light, which was on top of the lens. And you have auto, manual, and tally. So you get the colors that you want if you want to control it manually. And on the video, you have encoder. So these are the encoder settings for live streaming, and you have the mainstream and the secondary stream. So my main decision making around these encodings comes down to my internet speed at particular location. So if I have a really good internet connection, then obviously I would choose the highest resolution that I can get and also the highest frame rate that I can get. And I will also change this to have at least 1 iframe per second. And I would increase the bit rate to more, particularly if I have 60 frames per second, maybe I might have 20 megabits per second or even 30 megabits per second, even more. So that just depends on my internet connection. But if I have a really slow internet connection, then I might set this to HP, set this to H.265, constant bit rate, 3 megabits per second, and I would set this to 30 frames per second, and my iframe would be once every second still, because that's, I think, the minimum that would be needed for a live stream to be glitch free, even if there is a internet problem. But these settings mainly depends on how good your internet connection is. And if you go to output here, you can choose what output you want to come out from the HDMI port. So you have all the different options. You can choose 4K at 30 frames per second, or you have 1080p at 60 frames per second. So you can also choose to mute the audio. So let's just say you want to have your own audio source coming from somewhere else, like a mixer or a microphone elsewhere, then you can use that, or you can just leave it on. So I'm not saving any of these things because I don't have a particular settings in mind which I want to keep right now. And these are the overlay displays. So let's just say you want to create a canvas. So let me just add a canvas, and I'm going to set the canvas to 1080p because if I remember correctly, this is what we set it to. And here we can add text. You have all the different options for adding text, and you can also add images. So you can upload an image, and there's certain limitations on images, I think 1.7 megabytes. And it has to be JPEG or PNG, and it has to be the same size or smaller than the canvas itself. Obviously, the image can't be bigger than your canvas. And then you have a scoreboard. So I've gone through this Zoytech user interface previously in a different video. So if you want, just watch that video. So I'm not going to go through all the details again. But the one feature I really like about this is the scoreboard. And the nice thing about this scoreboard is you can select different parts of it, and you can choose to not show them. So you can hide different things. If you want a simple scoreboard and you don't want to take up too much of the screen, you can hide all the different things, and then you will be left with a simple scoreboard of, let's just say, 2 team names and a score, and none of the extra logos or other things that just take up more space on the actual video footage and might obstruct the actual sport itself which is being played. And if you go to audio here, you get all the different settings for audio. So your sampling rate, your bit depth, and the bit rate that comes through channel if you want stereo or mono, and the volume and your source. So you have line in, you have microphone, and you have USB. So line in is the line in port on the back of the device, which you need to have a line in audio level coming in. Mic is the built-in microphones on the device, which is on the front of the device. So those are built-in microphones. And then USB is if you actually insert your own USB microphone into the USB-A port on the back of the device. And if you go to streaming, then you have local streaming. So if you wanted to locally read the stream into your, let's just say, computer, and then re-encode it with OBS and add certain things to the stream and then transmit it upstream to your streaming server, then you could do it that way. And there's a live streaming option here as well. So there's nothing here, but if you wanted, you could add some. So you could add custom or YouTube. I usually choose custom, even though I typically live stream to YouTube, and instead of RTMP I use enhanced RTMP because I want to get the H.265 or HEVC codec. So here you can just choose an alias name and the URL. So this would be the YouTube URL, for example, for RTMP live streaming, and then the stream key, which again you get from YouTube, and you can put in the description. And if you wanted to record, then you could do that. So I don't have any recording devices connected to the camera. So I don't have a micro SD card or a USB stick or a network storage to connect to. But if you wanted to record at the same time as you were streaming, then you could do that here. And you would press refresh to show the list of devices that are available for recording. And there's NDI here. So you can enable NDI and choose which version you want. I typically don't use NDI, but the option is there. And if you go to network, here you have all the different details about the network configuration of the device. And if you want to run it as a hotspot, you can choose whether you want to run it as a hotspot or not. So you can switch this off or you can turn it on. And then if you come to Wi-Fi here, there are two options. So you can enable Wi-Fi or disable it. So here it's disabled. So now that Zoe PTZ is connected to my Wi-Fi, so it also has an IP address for the Wi-Fi interface, which you can see there. So I can connect to it as well. So I can log in here as well. Let's see what happens. And here I get everything as well. And I can go to settings. And let's go to network. And here you can see the settings. So using this approach, the Zoe PTZ should be able to stream over Wi-Fi now. And here are the default ports for various protocols. So you can change these, but typically I leave them as they are because it's just easier to remember that way. And this is the MDNS name for it, which you should be able to use for connecting to this device, but I haven't had success with using this, so I'm just using the IP address. And also if you wanted to record it to a network storage, then you could add the details here. So if you press add, then it actually gives you the options for the details of how you want to connect to it, the IP address, the directory, and the versions, and username and password, and so on. So I don't have a network storage, so I'm going to delete that and just go to system. And here you have the device name, the theme, NDI is activated, user management. So in the first page when I logged in, the username was admin and password admin. This is where that is stored. And time. So which time zone you're in. So let me actually change this to the UK time zone, and I'm going to leave the time server as it is. But you can change this as well to whatever time server you want it to work with. And here you can restore factory default settings and restart it or standby. So this device, as I mentioned previously, doesn't have a shutdown, so you can have standby or sleep mode, as they say, and you can restart it as well. And this is the page for upgrading the firmware. And you also have logs if you wanted to do troubleshooting or get help. And I think those are the main things. So if you go back to the live control page here, now let's just say I wanted to add a
live stream, I could click the plus here and it would take me to the streaming menu which we were before. So if I was to add here, and let's just say I wanted to add a custom service, enhanced RTMP. Okay, so I've created a stream in YouTube and I'm gonna copy the live stream URL and I'm gonna go back here and actually create a real live stream for YouTube. And also I'm gonna copy the stream key and I'm gonna make it enhanced RTMP and set the alias name to, I don't know, H265 RTMP. And I'm not going to use authentication and click save. Okay, I can't have a dash, but I can have an underscore, I think. So I'm going to save that. And if I go back to video encoder, and here I want to set this to the high profile, constant bitrate, and set this to 3 megabits per second, and I want the frame rate at 30 frames per second, and 1 iframe every 1 second. So the secondary stream, yeah, this can be anything. I don't really care about it. It can be 1 iframe every 4 seconds. So let's save this one. And save this one as well. So the encoder setting for the mainstream is what should be used when we are streaming. So if we go back to live here and we have this H265 RTMP and I click edit, this is the one that it should be using. So the encoding is configured as the mainstream and these are the details. So I can click here to enable this stream, or I can go to the live control page here, and here you can see it. So if I enable it here, you can see that it's doing something. So it started the live streaming. So if I go to YouTube now, data should start to come across. So here you can see that it says excellent connection, and within 10 to 20 seconds, the video footage should show up. So here you can see that the video is now showing on YouTube. So I'm not going to go live now, but I just wanted to show how easy it is to configure this. So this page is obviously on YouTube, and you can configure this on YouTube if you have streaming enabled, and you configure a key, and you have the URL here, and the stream key which you use there. And when I finish streaming, then I can click this again to stop the streaming. And now it's gone off. And the similar things for recording as well. So if I click plus here, it takes me to this page for recording. And as long as I have a micro SD card or a USB stick inserted into the back of the device, then I can configure those things here to record the video footage here as well. Anyway, let me know if you have any questions or if you want me to demo this in more detail.
I want to quickly go through the advantages of this camera in comparison to other similar cameras so that you get an idea whether this camera is right for you or not. This camera has a lot of flexibility in a lot of aspects of its operation, including ports, software, video and live streaming. So there's no need for software apps. Zoitek provides the software for controlling the camera, but controls can be accessed via the web browser, and the device can be accessed directly through Wi-Fi as well, and Bluetooth in the future. And the device can be controlled through the infrared remote control, and you can even configure it to use it with an Xbox controller joystick. And it also has REST APIs, which allows usage and integration with any third-party system. And then you also have RS-232 and RS-485 or 422 for controlling it, which means it can be controlled from a PC or a dedicated camera controller, as well as over NDI. And there's no need for connecting this to a computer. So you can connect the Ethernet port, and then you can use the remote control to control the device or connect to the device's Wi-Fi to access the Zoe UI web interface and then control the device that way. And then you could power it potentially through a USB power bank or power over Ethernet with a power over Ethernet injector. So you could actually have a completely unplugged package for live streaming. So you would have this device, You set up the Wi-Fi as an access point and you connect to it to control it that way. And then the Ethernet port, you can connect it to a smartphone for internet connectivity, and you could essentially run your live stream without any need for a computer. And the other advantage of this camera is that it has two powering options, so power over Ethernet and DC input, although the DC input is not ideal, to be honest. And there's no option for powering this device with USB-C or even micro USB. And in terms of video output options, again, you have a lot of flexibility. So you have HDMI output, 3G SDI output, and obviously NDI output. And you can also record simultaneously, and you can do that to a micro SD card, USB stick from the USB port, and also to network storage over the Ethernet port. And the fact that you can do this simultaneously while live streaming and having output to multiple video outputs and recording devices is what makes it quite flexible. In terms of disadvantages for this camera, one is that it doesn't have a USB-C port for powering it, and what makes that worse is that the DC port is also very uncommon. So I haven't been able to find a USB trigger cable for it, or even an AC adapter, or any DC barrel jack converters for it. So it doesn't have USB, and the DC port is really uncommon and difficult to find any compatible converters or adapters for it. So that's, I think, the only major disadvantage that I can think of for this camera. So another place which I think they could improve on is here you have the 1/4 inch 20 and here you have the anti-twist locating hole. So what they could do is also add a 3/8 inch 16 threaded hole here. So you would have 3/8 inch 16, 1/4 inch 20 and the locating hole. So that would give it a little bit more options if you want to mount it on a Manfrotto plate or whatever else you want to mount it on. You also have the 3/8 inch 16 option to mount it. That would just give it a little bit more flexibility and make it compatible with a larger size screw as well, which should be a little bit more stable. So those are the only negative aspects of this camera that I can think of.
Okay, so I've started up the app and I'm going to configure it for one of the cameras. So I have to choose the camera model. So 4K PTZ and camera 1. And if I remember the IP correctly, it was this. And allow access. So you can see that the camera is there. So in theory, if I had more cameras now connected, whether that's Zoytech cameras or maybe other cameras connected to Zoytech devices like the Zoybox encoder, for example, then I should be able to bring them up this way. And one thing I just wanted to show you in the settings is that it actually uses RTSP. So it actually connects to the RTSP on the camera to fetch this video footage. And here you can control the camera. So you have the zoom, the focus. So let me see. Yeah, the zoom works. So the controls here might actually be easier to use than some of the controls on the Zoytech UI, the web interface, in terms of moving the camera. It's a little bit more controlled, whereas on the Zoe UI, it's a little bit faster. And obviously here you can control the camera speed as well. So there are a bunch of options here. I think this user interface is really good if you have lots of cameras and you want to switch between them and you have pre-configured settings. For my purpose, when I'm live streaming, I will be essentially using the cameras directly for live streaming. Or if I want to pull in a stream in this way, I would be probably pulling this into OBS and then live stream from there. So this is slightly different for my purpose than I think what this software is made for. So if you, for example, are running a security system and you want all these cameras like this, then I think this is a more suitable software application for that. And if you press this record button here, then you can start recording. So I'm going to stop recording. So this is quite a simple user interface, and it also has the recording options. So I think it's good, and you can record it to your local computer. So I think there are quite a few recording options now with this camera. So you can record to a micro SD card, you can record to a USB stick, you can record to a network storage, and using this app you can also record it directly to your computer. And if you have multiple cameras, then you can record all of them to your local hard disk, as long as your computer can put up with the strain of recording them and capturing all the footage. Okay, so this is the Zoe X user interface, and it's automatically detected my camera and the IP address, and the firmware version is visible here, and if I click on it, it shows all the different versions for the hardware, the firmware, and everything else, including the NDI, the serial number as well. And if I click on NDI, here it shows you all the details for that. And here you have some operations as well, so you can delete it to remove it, and I can upgrade the firmware on it if I wanted to. And also I can copy the settings. If I have lots of different cameras and I want to copy the settings from one camera to another one or paste it to lots of different cameras, then this is an easy way to do that. And this button allows me to pin this actual camera to the top. So I'm going to unpin it now. And now it's scanning to find by IP address as opposed to serial number. So you can see that there's a red dot there. And the reason for that is that it's the first time that it has discovered this device. So I can clear it now. And I can go back to serial number scanning mode instead. So it's found the same camera, and this time there's no red dot because it had already discovered this camera previously. And this is to delete all the offline devices, and this is to clear all the ones that have been discovered already. And this is a refresh or rescan. And this provides checkboxes. So if I wanted to do an operation on lots of different devices, that would be useful. But in this case, I only have one device connected, so the checkbox doesn't make sense. But let's just say you wanted to upgrade the firmware on lots of different cameras of the same type, and I guess you could do it this way by going to upgrade and then upload the file, and it would apply to all the cameras that are connected. So I only have one camera here, so I can't display all the functionality. And if you see the gear icon there, if I click that, it will go to the web interface of that particular device. So I'm going to go to settings here, and I have this web interface open to this particular camera now. So if I go back to home here on top, I have the camera here. And here you can see that I can go back to the web interface whenever I want. So I have both of them open here. So home is for listing of all the devices, and then I have this one particular device. Anyway, so I don't think there's much more to show on this software, but essentially it's a management software for all the cameras that you have connected to your network. And it's an easy way to manage it, I guess. And you can directly go through each of the web interfaces through this user interface without needing to find out IP addresses and then going to your browser and connecting to them. You can just connect directly to them through this gear icon. And once you've opened them, they will remain open on the top here. And if you have a lot of cameras, that definitely makes your life easier, particularly when upgrading firmware on lots of them and so on. This software is a lot better than the web user interface in the sense that it's easier to use and a little bit more comprehensive, and it has icons and everything. But the web UI is really convenient to use without having to install any software. So I can use the web UI from my old PC, which is a Windows 7 machine, or I can use it from a smartphone. But when I have a proper workstation, then I can also install the Zoe X to get more ease of use and configuration here. If you have questions about a particular feature or functionality, then leave a question and I will try to create a follow-up video or answer your questions in the comments.